Quite a view, isn't it? Blue pretty much as far as the eye can see, some mountains in the distance, a little bit of haze. And if you think I've had to come halfway across the country to find this spot, you'd be wrong. This is Pavna Lake and it's just about 2 hours of a drive away from Mumbai city, and that makes it the perfect weekend holiday home destination for an affluent family. You know, bring the kids, bring the parents, do a bit of water sports, have a barbecue, enjoy the stars at night. And that also makes it the perfect stomping ground for a car like this, the brand new Mercedes-Benz GLE, which I am driving exclusively for you today. The reason this is the ideal stomping ground for the GLE is because while luxury SUVs like these spend most of their time in the city, there is a chance you could take them out into the countryside, like so. With 4-wheel drive and a reasonable amount of ground clearance, it can tackle a rough and rocky rural path like this with ease. But no serious off-roading, okay? And before things got a little too rocky, it was time to take the GLE out of the dirt and onto a more comfortable surface. Now, while it will also be available with 6-cylinder petrol and diesel engines, the one we're driving right now is the 300D, which is a 4-cylinder diesel. Now, before you scoff at the idea of a 4-cylinder diesel engine in such a big SUV like this, let me remind you that the 4-cylinder diesel in the previous GLE, the 250D, is the engine that was responsible for the bulk of this car's sales and its huge success in our market. You see, with a smaller engine, what Mercedes was able to do was price it really competitively. Sure, they took out a few frills, but ultimately it led to a much more affordable GLE. And sure, it wasn't quite as capable as the 6-cylinder model, but most people didn't care because you were getting a big, tough, luxurious Mercedes SUV at a far more affordable price. So this is the 300D, which takes over from the 250D as the GLE's smaller diesel engine. Yes, it's still a 4-cylinder, but this time it's the 2-liter engine that debuted in the E-Class and is now also in the C-Class. And in 300D, guys, it makes 245 horsepower and 500 Newton meters of torque. So yeah, as you can see, the numbers are actually quite substantial and sort of befitting of a car this big and this heavy. But how does that feel in the real world? Well, as we noted in the C300D as well, the advantage of this engine is that it makes the bulk of its power really, really low down in the rev range, pretty much as soon as you touch the accelerator pedal. What that does is give you a sense that there is a strong reserve of power. So even a big SUV like this feels surprisingly brisk from the moment you get moving. It's when you start to extend it further, say past around 3,500 RPM, that yeah, you do feel like you should have had a larger engine in a car this big. And I suppose that if you load it up with people and luggage, it might feel a little bit more strained. But that all feels like occasional use. For most people every day, this 300D engine will be more than ample for their needs. The gearbox at low ambling speeds is absolutely superb. It just shuffles through its many ratios, 9 of them, really quickly and seamlessly without you even realizing. It's just that when you try to suddenly catch it out with a quick downshift, it does get a bit caught out sometimes and can miss a ratio while trying to serve up the right one. Engine refinement is really rather good. Sure, you can hear it when you're outside the car, but when you're inside and just cruising along, it's really quite silent. It's only when you really start to pull it past about 3,000 RPM and it starts to strain that you hear that diesel clatter from under the bonnet. What's a bit puzzling is that when you want to hustle things along, you realize that this car doesn't have a sport mode, not even for the engine and gearbox, let alone the steering and the suspension. When's the last time you saw a luxury car that didn't have a sport mode? It does at least have paddle shifters, but that's not quite the same as simply making things more responsive at the flick of a switch, as you can do in most automatic cars. This, as it turns out, foreshadows what comes next. Now, speaking of sportiness, I'm immediately reminded of this car's chief rival, the BMW X5. Now, making an SUV as big and heavy as this handled really well is no easy task, and to their credit, BMW have done a fantastic job of it. But the Mercedes-Benz GLE, it doesn't go down that route, and nor should it. This one leans heavily into the luxury, and that's just fine. This is not an AMG version, remember, this is just the standard 300D. So this car, for a start, the 4-cylinder version, doesn't get air suspension, nor does it get adaptive dampers of any sort. It rides on passive steel springs, and overall they have been set up rather softly. The result is that the GLE tends to float around a little bit over undulations, and in corners it can be really roly-poly. But at the same time, it's got this really cushy ride quality that makes it the consummate luxury car. Just that on these 19-inch wheels, sharper bumps tend to register quite strongly in the cabin, and for all this car's floatiness and wallowiness, it does have a bit of a firm edge. Now, it's not just the peppy engine that makes light work of this car's huge dimensions. It's also the steering. It's really light and really quick, which means nipping in and out of traffic is an act of absolute joy in a car this big. So yes, the GLE wears its luxury credentials with pride. It doesn't attempt to be sporty. It doesn't want to set your pulse racing. Instead, it just wants you to relax and be comfortable. Now yes, while this 4-cylinder 300D, like its predecessor the 250D, is likely to be the popular variant of the new GLE, there will also be two higher spec 6-cylinder versions. There will be the 400D, which uses a more powerful version of the S-Class's 3-litre straight-six diesel, and the 450 petrol, which I went to drive the following day. Now you'll have to excuse me, I think I've stumbled to a bit of a industrial area and everything around me is a little bit of a mess, but hey, I'm driving the GLE 450 petrol and that's exciting. The reason it's exciting is because it debuts Merc's new straight-six petrol engine in India. That's right, so far we've had only the straight-six diesel, which we saw in the S-Class and the G-Wagon, and now we've got the straight-six 3-litre petrol. The engine makes a substantial 367 horsepower and 500 Newton meters of torque, but it's got another trick up its sleeve. What it also comes with is a 48-volt mild hybrid system, and that's not just to activate a stop-start system, which of course it has. It also provides boost to fill in the gaps when the turbos are spooling up, which is very handy. The other main difference between this car and the lesser 300D is that this one has air suspension. It's also riding on 20-inch wheels rather than 19-inch wheels, and that does have an effect on the ride. Though the air suspension does a slightly better job of cushioning you from the road, the 20-inch wheels do let you feel a lot of the sharper bumps inside the cabin. Just like that. The thing is though, with all that extra suspension hardware and the bigger wheels, this car feels altogether heavier to steer, so that lightness you got from the steering in the GLE 300D is somehow missing at low speeds. The advantage of the air suspension, of course, is that if the potholes get really hairy, the car can be lifted to off-road height at the flick of a switch. But to the engine, and well, let's just show you what it's like. Wow, it really sounds nice. That's the advantage of a straight-six engine versus a V6. It just tends to sound that little bit better. And certainly, if you want a lot of punch from your GLE, this is the one you have to go for. And the best part is, refinement at idle is just superb, and it really doesn't make too much of a noise unless you really rev it out. What is really funny is that even in this car, there is no sport mode in the dynamic selection menu. While that might seem possible in the 300D diesel, with this amazing petrol engine, you really wish there was a way for it to pick up its skirts and go a little bit quicker and be a little bit more urgent. Yes, again, there are paddles for you to use, but what if you just wanted to drive a little bit more briskly? That's just not an option. Even the air suspension, yes, it has different modes and it is adaptive, but because there is no sport mode, there is no real hunkered down sporty one that hardens up the suspension. There is comfort, which is quite a low setting, and there is off-road, which is the high setting. But there's nothing that really feels sporty. So it's always got that comfortable, plush, mushy ride. And while that's really good for comfort, it's not so great for driving fast around corners. Also to be noted is that the Indian GLEs don't get the fancy e-active body control system that uses the 48-volt electric system and active anti-roll bars to keep body movements in check. But fret not, because while that feature may be missing, Mercedes have made sure to load the GLE up with a long list of equipment. Highlights include 4-zone climate control, wireless phone charging, 64 color ambient lighting, and 360-degree surround cameras. But more than the equipment in here, it's the interior itself that blows you away. There's that typically high level of quality we've come to expect from Mercedes, with an abundant use of rich materials. I particularly like the huge unvarnished wood veneer panels, the knurled rocker switches, and the 4 brushed aluminium AC vents. The front seats are big and comfortable but have very limited adjustment and no memory function in the 4-cylinder car. And then there are the two 12.3-inch screens that handle infotainment and instrumentation. Yes, we've seen this before, but in the GLE they sit beautifully docked in the dashboard like a high-end OLED TV in the home entertainment unit in your living room. It looks fantastic and functions even better, as it now uses Merck's latest infotainment system, MBUX. That means the left screen is now a touchscreen, but you can also use the gesture control and AI-driven voice commands. And if that's not enough, you also get 2 touchpads on the steering wheel that should make it really easy on the move. It even has quirky functions like automatically setting the seat position based on your height. With MBUX, Mercedes has gone from lagging behind on infotainment just a few years ago to being one of the best around. But that's enough about the front, because the big surprise comes in the back seat. Now, a lot of work has gone into the back seat of this new GLE, and well, if you think I'm sitting far forward, you're right. That's because this seat is now powered. That's right, it will slide all the way back, freeing up loads of legroom, and it can even be reclined. It has to be noted now at this point that this new GLE has moved to a long wheelbase format. It's not special for India, it's all over the world. It is now a long wheelbase car in Mercedes parlance, and that means legroom in the back is just tremendous. Headroom, as ever, is also ample. I just wish the seat was a little bit higher, this being an SUV, and that the cushions weren't so firm. There's also a lot of other stuff to keep you happy in the back here, like a powered sunblind, a pair of USB-C ports, interestingly. I hope your phone is compatible with that, and dual zone climate control specifically for the back, and of course, who can miss the massive sunroof? It really is the E-class of SUVs, isn't it? That wheelbase is 80mm longer than the old car, and the seat slides back and forth by 100mm and reclines by 30 degrees. The powered seats also mean you can fold them at the touch of a button from the boot. Not that you'd need to, because it has a voluminous 630 litres, and unlike many other Mercs, it now has a dedicated recess for the spare tyre. To say the new GLE is a big leap forward is an understatement as big as the SUV itself. The thing is huge, and it's all gone into the back seat, where it matters most, especially in the Indian context. Space and comfort are top class back here, and the powered slide and recline function is a game changer for this class. You'll be well catered to at the front as well, with lots of comfort, luxury, and a long modern equipment list, centered around the excellent new MBUX infotainment. Perhaps the GLE is a bit unexciting to drive and a little too bouncy on its soft suspension, but it certainly is refined and peppy enough no matter which engine you choose. It is, of course, going to be more expensive when launched in January 2020, with an expected starting price of around 75 lakh rupees, but we think it's worth it for the sheer breadth of improvements Mercedes has put into it.